Imani's voice trembled as she sang the Korean lullaby under her breath, her hands scrubbing the marble floor where the envelope had fallen, photographs spilling out like damning confessions across the wet surface. Her fingers were raw, bleeding from where the broken vase had sliced her palm, crimson mixing with soapy water as the images stared up at her. The fiancé in another man's arms. Timestamps from last week. The household staff froze in the hallway, eyes wide but mouths shut, watching the boss's woman tower over the trembling black maid on her knees. "You filthy outsider," Ji-yeon hissed in venomous Korean, her Louboutin heel crushing one of the photographs. "You think speaking our language makes you belong here? You're just help, easily replaced trash." But Imani's eyes weren't on the woman above her. They were fixed on the reflection in the polished floor, the heavy oak door opening behind them. Kang Min-jun stood motionless in the doorway, his cold gaze locked on the scattered photographs at his maid's knees. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. Imani's pulse hammered in her ears as Ji-yeon's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension. The other woman's confident posture faltered, her designer heel lifting off the ruined photograph as she turned to face her fiancé. Min-jun's expression remained carved from stone, but something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes, something that made every person in that hallway take an instinctive step backward. "Min-jun-si," Ji-yeon began, her voice honey-sweet despite the venom she'd been spitting seconds before. "This woman was stealing from—" Everyone out. His voice was quiet, deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "Except you two." The staff scattered like birds before a storm. Imani remained on her knees, blood still dripping from her palm onto the pristine marble she'd been scrubbing for 3 hours that morning. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the cut, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to slow her racing heart. She'd been working at the Kang mansion for exactly 2 weeks. 14 days of keeping her head down, her voice quiet, her Korean hidden behind careful English. 14 days of watching Ji-yeon terrorize the staff in rapid Korean, assuming none of them understood the cruel words she used to describe them. Imani had understood every single one. "Stand up," Min-jun said in English, his gaze still fixed on Ji-yeon. "Both of you." Imani rose on shaking legs, her uniform torn at the shoulder where Ji-yeon had grabbed her. The cold air from the air conditioning raised goosebumps on her exposed skin. She stood a respectful distance away, eyes downcast, every nerve in her body screaming to run. But there was nowhere to run to. No apartment waiting. She'd been evicted 3 weeks ago. No family to call. Her adoptive parents had died in a car accident 8 months prior, leaving her with nothing but debt and memories of 15 years in Busan. Min-jun walked forward, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the marble. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. Imani had seen him exactly 4 times since she'd started working here. Once from a distance as he left for work, twice passing in the hallway where he'd nodded once, curtly, before disappearing into his study. And one night at 3 a.m. when she'd been in the kitchen making coffee, unable to sleep in the tiny staff room that smelled of industrial cleaner. He'd appeared in the doorway like a ghost, dressed in a blood-stained white shirt, and asked in perfect English if she'd make him a cup too. She had. They'd stood in silence, drinking coffee in the dark, and she'd felt his eyes on her the entire time, studying, assessing. That gaze had made her pulse spike in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Now that same gaze dropped to the photographs scattered across the floor. He crouched, moving with economical precision, and picked up the first image. Ji-yeon with a man Imani didn't recognize, their bodies pressed together in what was clearly more than a business meeting. Min-jun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He picked up another. Another. His expression never changed, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Min-jun, this is all a misunderstanding," Ji-yeon said, switching to rapid Korean. This stupid girl doesn't know what she saw. She's just a maid, an outsider who... She understands you. Minjun's voice cut through Ji-yeon's excuses like a blade. He stood, holding the photographs, and finally looked at Imani. Don't you? Imani's throat went dry. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading since the vase had shattered and those photographs had spilled across the floor. She could deny it, pretend she didn't understand. But something in his eyes, a test, maybe, or a challenge, made her lift her chin and meet his gaze directly. Yes, Sajangnim, she said in perfect Korean, using the formal term for boss. I understand everything. Ji-yeon's face went white, then red. You lying little? Enough. Minjun didn't raise his voice, but Ji-yeon's mouth snapped shut. He turned to Imani, his dark eyes unreadable. How long have you spoken Korean? Since I was 13, Imani said, still in Korean. Her voice was steadier than she felt. My adoptive parents were missionaries in Busan for 15 years. I grew up there. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Recognition. Busan dialect, he said, almost to himself. Then louder. Why didn't you mention this when you interviewed? Because people hear what they expect to hear, Imani replied, switching back to English. Her hand throbbed where the vase had cut her, blood seeping through her fingers. They see a black woman applying for a cleaning job. They don't expect fluent Korean. So I stayed quiet, made myself small, invisible. Invisible, he repeated, something dark and approving in his tone. His eyes dropped to her bleeding hand. You're injured. It's nothing. It's not nothing. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Cedar and something darker, something that made her pulse spike despite the situation. Show me. Imani hesitated, then extended her hand. The cut ran across her palm, deep enough to need stitches. Minjun's larger hand encircled her wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound. Heat radiated from where his skin met hers. His thumb brushed the edge of the cut, and she had to bite back a gasp. This needs medical attention, he said, still holding her wrist. Ji-yeon did this? Imani glanced at the other woman, who stood frozen, rage and fear warring on her perfect features. The vase broke, Imani said carefully, when I was cleaning her office. That's not what I asked. The weight of his gaze pressed down on her. Imani had spent her whole life making herself smaller, quieter, less threatening. 28 years of bowing her head and accepting cruelty with grace. But standing here, blood dripping onto marble floors that cost more than a year of her salary, something inside her shifted. She shoved me into the table, Imani said quietly. The vase fell. I tried to catch it. I couldn't. Minjun's grip on her wrist tightened infinitesimally. When he looked at Ji-yeon, the woman actually took a step back. You put your hands on my staff. She was stealing. She was cleaning, Minjun said, his voice still that deadly quiet. And she found something you left carelessly lying around, something that answers several questions I've had over the past 3 months. He released Imani's wrist and picked up more photographs, spreading them across the marble like a deck of cards. Bank statements with Ji-yeon's name, wire transfer records, and one image that made Imani's blood run cold. A blueprint of the mansion with a red X marked over a specific room. Hana's room. Explain these, Minjun said to Ji-yeon. Now. The woman's composure cracked. They're nothing. Business documents. You're overreacting. The man in these photographs is Choi Tae-sung. Minjun's voice could have frozen fire. The head of Cheongryong. The organization that killed my sister and her husband, the organization that's been trying to eliminate me for 3 years. And you've been meeting with him for 6 months. Explain. Imani's breath caught. She'd known Minjun was dangerous. Anyone who lived in a mansion like this, who commanded the kind of deference the staff showed him, who moved with that particular combination of grace and threat. But she hadn't known the specifics, hadn't known about the sister, the violence, the war beneath the surface of this pristine Beverly Hills life. Ji-yeon's face twisted with desperation and rage. "You don't understand Korean loyalty," she spat. "You think you can come to Los Angeles and build an empire while forgetting tradition? While raising that damaged little girl like she's a trophy? The Cheonggyeong organization understands respect, understands how things should be done. You're nothing but a thug pretending to be legitimate." The air in the room changed. Imani felt it like a physical thing, the shift from dangerous to lethal. Minjun didn't move, didn't change expression, but suddenly she understood why people feared him. "Get out," he said softly. "You have 1 hour to collect your things and leave this house. If you're still here in 61 minutes, I will personally ensure you regret it. You can't, I can, and I will." He pulled his phone from his pocket, pressed one button. "Security, Ms. Park is leaving. Escort her to her room, supervise her packing, and ensure she's off the property within the hour. If she attempts to enter any room except her own, or contact anyone outside, detain her." 2 men in dark suits appeared in the doorway so quickly they must have been waiting nearby. They moved toward Ji-yeon, who backed away, her perfect composure finally shattering. "This isn't over," she hissed at Minjun. Then her gaze cut to Imani, pure hatred blazing. "You think you've won something, cleaning woman? You think he'll see you as anything but help? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." The security team escorted her out, her heels clicking furiously against the marble. Imani stood frozen, her hand still bleeding, her mind racing. What had just happened? What had she just witnessed? What would happen to her now? Minjun turned to face her fully. Up close, he was even more imposing, 6'2" of controlled power, his face carved in hard lines, his eyes dark and intense. He couldn't be called handsome in any conventional sense. There was too much danger in him, too much darkness. But looking at him made something in Imani's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Come with me," he said in English. "That hand needs treating. I can do it myself. That wasn't a request." He turned and walked toward the far wing of the mansion. After a moment's hesitation, Imani followed, her heart hammering, her torn uniform hanging off her shoulder, her future uncertain as the blood dripping from her palm. He led her through corridors she'd cleaned but never truly seen, past artwork worth more than her adoptive parents' entire life savings, to a private study she hadn't known existed. The room was masculine, understated, dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a Zen garden where water trickled over stones. Minjun gestured to a chair and disappeared through another door, returning with a comprehensive first aid kit that looked military grade. "Sit," he said. Imani sat, her body obeying before her mind caught up. She watched as he pulled a chair close, too close, and reached for her injured hand. His fingers were steady, competent, as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic that stung enough to make her inhale sharply. He paused, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. "This will hurt more," he said, holding up a needle and surgical thread. "But it needs stitches. I can call a doctor." "You can do it," Imani said. She didn't know why she trusted him with this, but she did. "I've seen worse." His eyebrow raised fractionally. "Have you?" It wasn't quite a question. He worked in silence, his concentration absolute as he stitched the wound with surprising skill. Imani watched his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell forward slightly as he bent over her hand. His cologne filled her senses, cedar and smoke and something uniquely him. She shouldn't be noticing these things, shouldn't be aware of how warm his hands were, how gentle despite their obvious capacity for violence. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked, needing to break the silence, needing to think about something other than his proximity. "Necessity," he replied, tying off the final stitch. "When you live the kind of life I live, you learn practical skills. Can't always go to hospitals. Too many questions." He wrapped her hand in clean gauze with the same methodical precision. When he finished, he didn't immediately release her. His thumb traced along the edge of the bandage, a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Thank you," Imani said quietly, "for believing me about Ji-yeon." Minjun's dark eyes lifted to hers. "I didn't believe you. I believed the evidence. There's a difference." The words should have stung, but his gaze held something else: curiosity, assessment, a spark of something that made heat crawl up her neck. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them, and moved to the window overlooking the garden. "You said you grew up in Busan," he said, his back to her. "Why did you come back to Los Angeles?" "My parents died," Imani said, the words still difficult 8 months later. "Car accident. They'd retired here, wanted to be close to their original church. I came back to settle their affairs and found myself with nothing but debt and memories." "No other family?" "No. They adopted me when I was 6. I don't remember my birth parents." She stood, unsure if she should leave, unsure if she was dismissed. "I should get back to work. There's still—" "You're not working today," Minjun said, turning to face her. "You're injured. Take the rest of the day. Tomorrow we'll discuss your position here." Dread coiled in her stomach. "My position?" "I can't have someone with your skills wasting them cleaning floors." His gaze was unreadable. "We'll find better use for you. For now, rest." "The staff quarters, are they adequate?" Imani thought of the small, sterile room with its industrial smell and single window overlooking the garage. Thought of how grateful she'd been for even that much. "They're fine." "You're lying. It wasn't a question." "But I admire the diplomacy. Go, rest. And Imani." He waited until she looked at him. "Thank you. For finding those photographs. For having the courage to reveal what you knew." Her name in his voice did dangerous things to her heartbeat. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left before she could do something foolish, like ask why his touch had made her skin burn, why his proximity had stolen her breath, why she wanted desperately to stay in that room despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. The rest of that day passed in surreal quiet. The household staff whispered, speculating about Ji-yeon's dramatic departure, the security team loading her belongings into a car, her threats and tears echoing through the mansion. Imani stayed in her room, her hand throbbing, her mind replaying those moments in Minjun's study over and over. The way he'd touched her wrist, the gentleness in hands that had undoubtedly broken bones, and worse. The heat in his eyes when he'd said her name. This was madness. He was her employer, a dangerous man in a dangerous world. She was a maid with nothing to her name but debt and a language no one expected her to speak. This shouldn't go anywhere. But her body didn't seem to care about logic. It only remembered the way he'd made her feel seen for the first time in longer than she could remember. That night, Imani couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., she gave up trying and made her way to the kitchen, moving quietly through the dark house. She was making coffee when she heard it, crying, soft, muffled, heartbroken. Coming from upstairs. She shouldn't investigate, shouldn't involve herself further in this family's business. But the sound was too familiar. She'd cried herself to sleep like that for months after her parents died. Before she consciously decided, her feet were carrying her up the staff staircase to the family wing, following the sound to a partially open door. The room was decorated for a child. Pink walls, stuffed animals, a nightlight shaped like a moon, and curled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, was a small girl with dark hair and tear-stained cheeks. Hana, Minjun's 6-year-old niece. the child who hadn't spoken since her parents' death. Imani's heart cracked. She knew she should get Minjun, should leave this to family. But the girl looked so small, so lost. Instead, she stepped into the room quietly and sank to the floor several feet away, giving the child space. "Hey, sweetheart," Imani said softly in Korean. "It's okay. You're safe." Hana's red-rimmed eyes lifted, frightened and wary. Imani began to hum, then sing, the Korean lullaby her adoptive mother had sung to her every night for 15 years. The same song that had carried her through grief and loneliness, that had made a foreign country feel like home. Her voice was soft, untrained, but filled with emotion as the familiar words filled the room. "Dali balga balga, the moon is bright. Dainaj gata gata, bright as day." Hana's crying quieted. She stared at Imani with wide eyes, something like recognition flickering across her small face. Slowly, carefully, the little girl uncurled from her protective ball and moved closer. Imani kept singing, tears burning her own eyes as Hana climbed into her lap and pressed her face against Imani's shoulder. She didn't know how long they sat like that, Imani rocking gently, singing every verse she could remember while Hana's breathing slowly evened out. The child's small body relaxed against hers, trusting and warm. When the song ended, Imani whispered, "You're so brave, Hanaya. So brave and so loved." "My mother used to sing that." The voice from the doorway made Imani's head snap up. Minjun stood there, still dressed in the same clothes from earlier, his expression raw in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. How long had he been standing there? "I'm sorry," Imani whispered. "I heard her crying, and I couldn't. Don't apologize." His voice was rough with emotion. He was clearly fighting to control. He moved into the room, his eyes on Hana's sleeping face. "She hasn't let anyone hold her since the funeral, not even me. And that song." He swallowed hard. "My sister sang that every night, Busan dialect and all. Hana hasn't heard it in 6 months." Imani's throat tightened. "I didn't know, It was the only lullaby I knew." Minjun crouched beside them, his shoulder brushing Imani's. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the grief he kept locked down tight. Gently, he reached out and stroked Hana's hair with a tenderness that made Imani's heart ache. "You have a gift," he said quietly, his eyes meeting Imani's. "She trusts you. That's rare." "Children sense safety," Imani replied. "They know who to trust." His gaze intensified, something shifting in his expression. "Do they?" The air between them thickened. Imani was acutely aware of how close he was, how his breath stirred her hair, how his knee pressed against hers. Heat radiated from him, making her pulse kick into overdrive. She should move away, should break this moment. But Hana slept peacefully in her arms, and Minjun was looking at her like she'd performed a miracle. "We should get her to bed," Imani whispered. Together they stood, Imani cradling the sleeping child, while Minjun pulled back the covers. She laid Hana down gently, tucking the blanket around her small form. Minjun stood on the other side of the bed, his hand resting on his niece's shoulder, his expression tender in a way that transformed his hard features into something almost beautiful. When they left the room, closing the door softly behind them, they stood in the hallway in darkness. Imani's injured hand throbbed. Her body thrummed with awareness of the man beside her, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. "Thank you," Minjun said. "For that, for her." "You don't need to keep thanking me." "I do. You've been here 2 weeks, and you've already proven yourself invaluable." He paused, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. "Get some sleep, Imani. Tomorrow we talk about your new position, and about Ji Yan's connections to Cheongryong. You may have stumbled into something more dangerous than you realize." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness. Imani stood frozen, her heart racing, her mind spinning. What had she gotten herself into? And why, despite the danger, despite the impossibility, despite every logical reason to stay away, did she want to walk back toward him instead of toward safety? The next morning, Imani was summoned to Minjun's private office. She dressed in a clean uniform, her only other one, and tried to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. Whatever he was going to say, whatever new position he'd mentioned, she needed this job. Needed the roof over her head, the steady paycheck, the escape from the streets that had been waiting to swallow her. She knocked on the heavy oak door. Enter. Minjun sat behind a massive desk, looking every inch the CEO he claimed to be. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind him, casting him in silhouette. Two other men stood in the room. One was clearly security, the other wore an expensive suit and carried a tablet. Sit, Minjun said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Imani sat, her bandaged hand folded in her lap, her spine straight. Minjun studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until she thought she might scream. The photographs you found, he finally said. There were documents with them, blueprints, financial records. You saw them? Yes, Sajangnim. Did you read them? Imani hesitated. Lying would be foolish. He'd know. Some of them. Before Ji-yeon came in. And what did you understand from what you read? This was a test. Imani knew it bone deep. She could play dumb, claim ignorance, try to make herself small and non-threatening, or she could be honest. I understood that someone was planning something terrible, she said quietly. The blueprint had a red X over what I assume is Hana's room. The financial documents showed wire transfers from Cheongryong accounts to Ji-yeon's private account. Large sums. And there were meeting notes in Korean discussing collateral and transfer of assets after wedding. The man with the tablet looked up sharply. Minjun's expression never changed, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. You read and comprehended complex financial documents in Korean, Minjun said, in the 30 seconds before Ji-yeon entered. That's impressive. I grew up in a banking household, Imani said. My adoptive father managed mission finances. He taught me to read financial documents in both languages, said it would help me advocate for myself. I didn't realize he meant it would one day save my life. It may have saved more than your life, the man with the tablet said. Minjun shot him a look that silenced him immediately. This is Marcus, Minjun said, gesturing to the man. He handles my legitimate business interests. And this is Chen, head of security. What I'm about to tell you requires your absolute discretion. Can I trust you, Imani? Every instinct screamed that she was stepping into something dangerous, that she should demur, keep her head down, stay invisible. But Minjun was looking at her with those intense dark eyes, and she found herself saying, yes. Ji-yeon was planning to marry me, poison me slowly over several months. Hand over Hana to Choi Tae-sung as collateral for a merger between Baeko and Cheongryong, and inherit my entire estate, Minjun said, his voice matter-of-fact despite the horrifying words. She's been working with Cheongryong for 6 months. They killed my sister and her husband in a car accident that wasn't an accident. They've been trying to eliminate me for 3 years, and Ji-yeon was their inside agent. Imani's blood ran cold. Hana would have been used as leverage or killed, probably killed. His jaw tightened. You finding those photographs stopped that plan, but it doesn't stop the threat. Cheongryong knows I know now. They'll retaliate, and anyone associated with me becomes a target. So you're firing me, Imani said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. To keep me safe. No, Minjun said. I'm offering you a different position. I need someone fluent in Korean who can move through my world without attracting attention. Someone intelligent, observant, trustworthy, someone who already knows too much to be safely dismissed. "You want me to spy for you?" Imani said slowly. "I want you to be my eyes and ears in situations where I can't be present. I want you to attend Korean community events, listen to conversations, translate documents, help me identify threats before they materialize. In exchange, I'll pay you 10 times your current salary, provide private quarters in the main house, and ensure your safety." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But I won't lie to you, Imani. This is dangerous. If Cheongryong discovers you're working for me, they will come for you. I can offer you protection, but not guarantees. 10 times her salary, private quarters, the chance to use her skills, to be valued for her intelligence instead of invisible for her servitude. It was everything she'd secretly dreamed of and been too afraid to hope for. It was also possibly a death sentence. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire professionals, people trained for this." "Because they'd look like professionals. You look like exactly what you are, a woman trying to survive, unimportant, beneath notice, the perfect disguise." His expression softened fractionally. "And because Hana trusts you, that tells me everything I need to know about your character." Imani's heart hammered. She thought of her adoptive parents who'd taught her to be brave, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Thought of Hana's small body, curled in grief. Thought of the way Minjun had stitched her hand with such care, the way he'd looked at her in that darkened hallway like she mattered. "I'll do it," she said. Something fierce and approving blazed in his eyes. "Good. Marcus will handle the paperwork. Chen will begin your security briefing this afternoon. And Imani—" He stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. Close, too close. "Thank you for saying yes, for being brave enough to step into this world." "I'm not brave," Imani said, looking up at him. "I'm terrified." "Good," he said softly. "Fear keeps you alert, keeps you alive. Don't lose that fear. But don't let it stop you from living either." His hand reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek in a touch so brief she might have imagined it. Then he stepped back, the professional mask sliding into place, and began discussing logistics with Marcus. Imani sat there, her cheek burning where he'd touched her, her heart racing, her future suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. She'd just agreed to work for a mob boss, to step into a world of violence and danger, to put herself in the crosshairs of people who killed without hesitation, and despite the terror coursing through her veins, all she could think about was the way Minjun had looked at her, like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was worth protecting. This was dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with Cheongryong and everything to do with the way her body responded to his proximity, the way her heart jumped when he said her name, the way she wanted things she had no business wanting from a man like him. But it was too late to turn back now. She'd said yes, and somehow she knew that decision had just changed everything. The first week in her new role passed in a blur of intensive training. Chen taught her basic self-defense, how to spot surveillance, how to communicate coded messages. Marcus briefed her on the legitimate businesses that fronted Minjun's organization: import-export companies, real estate holdings, restaurants throughout Koreatown. And Minjun himself taught her to read between the lines of seemingly innocent conversations, to identify threats hiding in plain sight. They spent hours together in his study, going over documents, discussing strategy. The proximity was torture. Every time he leaned over her shoulder to point something out, his scent filled her senses. Every accidental touch sent electricity through her body. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable, and her pulse would spike. "You're a quick study," he said one evening, a week after she'd accepted the position. They were alone in his study, reviewing transcripts of intercepted phone calls. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the Zen garden in shades of gold and shadow. "I had good teachers," Imani replied, trying to focus on the documents instead of how his shirt sleeves were rolled up. revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked with scars that told stories she both wanted and didn't want to hear. "Hana asks for you," Minjun said, changing the subject abruptly. "Every night, she wants you to sing to her." Imani looked up, surprised. "Every night? You've created a ritual. She won't sleep without it." His expression softened. "Would you mind? I know it's not part of your job description." "Of course I don't mind," Imani interrupted. "She's a beautiful child. Spending time with her isn't work. It's a gift." Something blazed in his eyes at her words. He moved closer, his hip against the desk, towering over where she sat. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "Do you know that?" Her breath caught. "I'm really not." "You are." His hand lifted, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her, but was holding himself back. "You stepped into a nightmare and didn't run. You comforted a grieving child. You agreed to risk your life to protect people you barely know. That's not ordinary, Imani. That's extraordinary." Minjun. She didn't know what she was going to say. His name on her lips seemed to break something in him. His control slipped, just for a moment, and she saw raw want in his eyes before he stepped back, putting distance between them. "It's late," he said, his voice rough. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we have a community event. Stay close to me and listen. I'll introduce you as my new executive assistant. No one will question it." Imani nodded, not trusting her voice. She gathered her things and left, feeling his gaze burning into her back all the way to the door. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her heart racing. This was getting dangerous. Not the threat from Cheongryong, her feelings for a man she had no business wanting. The community event was held at a high-end Korean restaurant in Beverly Hills. Imani wore a dress Marcus had purchased for her. Elegant, expensive, nothing like anything she'd owned before. When she entered the restaurant and saw Minjun waiting, dressed in a tailored black suit, her mouth went dry. He was devastating, lethal, beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful. His eyes raked over her, dark and intense. "You look..." He trailed off, then simply offered his arm. "Ready?" The evening was a masterclass in subtlety and power. Minjun moved through the crowd like a shark through water, smooth, controlled, missing nothing. He introduced Imani with subtle possessiveness, his hand resting at the small of her back, keeping her close. She listened, smiled, played her part perfectly while her ears caught conversations in Korean that people assumed she couldn't understand. She heard things, whispers about Cheongryong's plans, speculation about Ji-yeon's disappearance, veiled threats disguised as polite inquiries. She memorized it all, her mind cataloging details while her body stayed hyper-aware of Minjun's proximity. When they returned to the mansion that night, Minjun pulled her into his study to debrief. "What did you hear?" Imani recounted every conversation, every nuance. His expression grew darker with each revelation. When she finished, he stood and paced to the window, tension radiating from every line of his body. "They're planning something," he said. "Soon. We need to be ready." "What can I do?" He turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Stay alive. Stay safe. That's what you can do." "That's not enough. I want to help." "You are helping." He crossed the room in 3 strides, suddenly in her space, his intensity overwhelming. "But if something happened to you because of me, because of this world..." He stopped, jaw clenched. "I can't. Do you understand? I can't." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither of them was ready to voice. Imani looked up at him, at the conflict warring in his eyes, and understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't just about protecting an asset. This was personal. "Nothing's going to happen to me," she said softly. "You won't let it." "You have too much faith in me." "No, I have exactly the right amount." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. The touch was electric, stealing her breath, making her heart pound so hard she was certain he could feel it. For one suspended moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with an intensity that scared her. But he stepped back, breaking the contact, his expression shuddering. "Good night, Imani." She left before she could do something foolish, like beg him not to send her away. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of growing closer, of stolen moments and heated looks, of touches that lingered too long and conversations that went deeper than professional. 3 weeks of Imani singing Hana to sleep every night, of watching Minjun relax around her, of feeling like maybe, impossibly, this broken family was becoming hers. 3 weeks of falling in love with a man she couldn't have. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is different. What you just saw is only the beginning. What comes next will change everything. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Hit like if you're rooting for Imani and want to see her win. And tell me in the comments, do you think she can survive in Minjun's dangerous world? I want to know your thoughts. From marble towers to humble streets, every click helps these stories reach those who need to hear them. Now let's find out what happens when everything falls apart. Then everything exploded. It happened on a Tuesday. Imani was shopping in Koreatown with Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, gathering supplies for the household. They were in a small market when Imani noticed them. 2 men watching too intently, their postures wrong, their attention too focused. "Mrs. Chen," Imani said quietly in Korean, "walk toward the back exit, slowly, don't run." The older woman's eyes widened, but she obeyed. They made it halfway when the men moved. Fast, professional. One grabbed Mrs. Chen, the other reached for Imani. Training took over. She dropped, twisted, drove her elbow into his solar plexus the way Chen had taught her. The man grunted but didn't fall. His hand closed around her arm, bruisingly tight. "Kang Minjun's new pet," he said in Korean. "Tai Sung-nim wants to meet you." Terror flooded through her, but underneath it, anger. She was tired of being grabbed, of being treated like an object to be traded and stolen. She drove her knee up, hard. He doubled over. She ran. She made it to the street. Her phone already in her hand, Minjun's number dialing. He answered on the first ring. "Imani!" "They found me!" she gasped, running, weaving through crowded sidewalks. "Koreatown, 2 men. They have Mrs. Chen." "Where are you?" His voice was deadly calm. "Fifth and Western, heading toward—" A car screeched to a halt beside her. Arms grabbed her from behind, lifting her off her feet despite her struggles. The phone clattered to the pavement. "Minjun!" she screamed, fighting, kicking. A cloth pressed over her nose and mouth. Chemical smell. Her vision blurred, the world tilted. Then darkness. She woke to pain, head throbbing, wrists bound, mouth dry. The room was concrete and cold, lit by a single bare bulb. A warehouse, she realized. Abandoned. Isolated. Every nightmare scenario she'd trained for. A man sat across from her. Mid-40s, expensive suit, cold eyes, Choi Tai-sung. She recognized him from the photographs. "You're awake," he said in Korean. "Good. I was beginning to worry I'd used too much chloroform. That would have been unfortunate. I have questions." "I'm not telling you anything," Imani said, her voice steadier than she felt. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You misunderstand. I don't need you to tell me anything. Your existence tells me everything. Kang Minjun, the man who feels nothing, suddenly has a weakness. A beautiful weakness who speaks our language, who's wormed her way into his household, into his family." He leaned forward. "Did you really think he cares about you? You're a tool, a convenient asset. The moment you stop being useful, you'll be discarded." "If that were true," Imani said, buying time, "you wouldn't have gone to this trouble to take me." His smile vanished. "Smart, but not smart enough. Kang will come for you, yes. And when he does, walking into our trap, finally acting on emotion instead of logic, we'll end him. Your bait, nothing more. Fear spiked through her, but she forced herself to think. She was in a warehouse, industrial area based on the sounds outside. Her hands were bound, but not her feet. 2 guards by the door, 3 more she'd spotted before Tae-sung entered. She needed to stall, to find an opening, to survive until Min-jun arrived. Because he would come. She knew it with bone-deep certainty. "You think you're the first to try using me against him?" Imani said, channeling bravado she didn't feel. Ji-yeon tried that. How did that work out for her? Tae-sung's expression darkened. Ji-yeon was a fool who got greedy. I'm not a fool, Miss Thompson. I'm a professional. And by morning, Kang Min-jun's empire will be mine. His niece will be my leverage against his remaining lieutenants. And you. He stood, looming over her. You'll be a cautionary tale about black women who don't know their place. Rage burned through her fear. She'd heard variations of that phrase her whole life. From strangers who saw her skin before her humanity. From people who thought she should be grateful for scraps. From everyone who'd tried to make her small. She was done being small. You want to know my place? Imani said, meeting his gaze with steel in her own. My place is with my family, protecting them, and you just made the worst mistake of your life. A phone rang. One of the guards answered, spoke rapidly in Korean. His face went white. He looked at Tae-sung. Boss, Kang is here. The entire Beko organization. They're surrounding the building. Tae-sung's composure cracked. He grabbed Imani, hauling her to her feet, a knife suddenly at her throat. Then we'll remind him what happens when he gets emotional. They dragged her to the center of the warehouse floor, floodlights blazing, the knife cold against her skin. The main doors burst open. Min-jun stood silhouetted in the entrance, flanked by a dozen men in tactical gear. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his eyes locked on Imani with an intensity that burned. Let her go, Tae-sung, Min-jun said, his voice carrying across the space. This is between us. No, Tae-sung replied, the knife pressing harder. Imani felt a trickle of blood slide down her neck. This is exactly what happens when you let yourself care. Did you really think you could have both? Power and love? You're weak, Kang. Your sister was weak. That's why she died. And this one, he shook Imani roughly. She'll die the same way. If you hurt her, Min-jun said, and his voice dropped to something subhuman, something terrifying. I will make your death last weeks. I will destroy everyone you've ever loved. I will burn your organization to ash and salt the earth where it stood. There will be nothing left of you but screams. The warehouse went silent. Even Tae-sung's men shifted nervously. Imani had never heard Min-jun like this. Unhinged, raw, lethal. It should have scared her. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Protected, claimed, loved. You taught me something, Tae-sung, Imani said quietly in Korean, pulling every eye to her. About leverage, about weakness. But you got one thing wrong. What's that? Tae-sung hissed. I'm not his weakness. She drove her head backward, smashing into his nose. He stumbled, the knife dropping. She twisted free. I'm his strength. Chaos erupted. Min-jun's men moved like a machine, precise and brutal. Imani dropped and rolled, dodging crossfire, her heart hammering. And then Min-jun was there, pulling her behind cover, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he? I'm fine, she gasped. Min-jun, Tae-sung is dead, or he will be. His eyes blazed with something feral. You're bleeding. It's just a scratch. He kissed her, hard, desperate, claiming. His hands cradled her face, his body pressed against hers, and the world narrowed to that single point of contact. She kissed him back with equal desperation, pouring everything she felt, fear, relief, love, into that moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Mine, he said, fierce and possessive. You're mine, Imani. Do you understand? Mine. Yours, she breathed. Always yours. Gunfire erupted nearby. Minjun pulled her close, shielding her body with his own. We need to move. Can you walk? I can run if I need to. He smiled, fierce and proud. That's my girl. They moved as one, Minjun's arm around her, his team covering their exit. Behind them, Tae-sung screamed threats and curses. But Imani didn't look back. She looked forward, toward safety, toward home, toward the man who'd just claimed her in front of his entire organization, toward her future. They made it to the waiting vehicles. Minjun pushed her inside, climbed in after her, and pulled her onto his lap. His hands were everywhere, checking, reassuring, holding. She buried her face in his neck and let herself shake, let herself feel the terror she'd been suppressing. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. You're safe. I've got you. I knew you'd come, she said. Always. His arms tightened around her. Always, Imani. I will always come for you. The vehicle sped through Los Angeles streets toward home, toward safety, toward whatever came next. And Imani, wrapped in the arms of a dangerous man who'd just declared war on the underworld for her, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Back at the mansion, Minjun carried her despite her protests that she could walk. He took her straight to his private quarters, not the guest room, not the staff wing, but his own bedroom. A doctor was already waiting, brought in by Marcus. The examination was thorough but quick. Minor cuts, bruises, no serious injuries. The doctor left instructions and departed. Then they were alone. Minjun stood by the window, his back to her, tension radiating from every line of his body. His hands gripped the window frame so hard his knuckles were white. Imani sat on the edge of his bed, still wearing the torn clothes from the warehouse, dried blood on her neck, her heart aching at the distance he was putting between them. Minjun, I almost lost you. His voice was raw, broken in a way she'd never heard. When I got your call, when it cut off, when I heard you scream my name. He turned to face her, and the devastation in his eyes stole her breath. I have built an empire on control, on logic, on never letting emotion dictate strategy. And in that moment, I would have burned the entire city to find you. Would have killed anyone who stood in my way. Would have sacrificed everything. But you didn't have to, Imani said softly. You found me. I'm safe. This time, he moved toward her, each step deliberate. But there will be others. As long as you're with me, you're a target. Cheonggyeong is crippled, but not destroyed. There are other organizations, other enemies. I can't promise you safety. Imani, I can't promise you normal. All I can promise is that I will spend every breath protecting you, and it still might not be enough. She stood, meeting him halfway across the room. I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for safety. I'm asking for you. His hand cupped her face, his touch achingly gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. You deserve better than this life, better than me. I deserve to choose, Imani said, covering his hand with hers. And I choose you, all of you. The danger, the complications, the impossible situation. I choose it because I choose you. Imani. Her name came out like a prayer, like a confession. I'm not a good man. I've killed. I've hurt people. My hands. He looked down at them, at the scars and the violence written there. These hands have done terrible things. These hands also stitched my wound with tenderness, she said, bringing them to her lips, kissing each scarred knuckle. These hands held Hana with such gentleness. These hands pulled me from danger. I see all of you, Minjun, the darkness and the light, and I'm not afraid. Something broke in him. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, his breath ragged. I love you, he said, the words rough and unpracticed, like he'd never said them before. I didn't think I was capable of this, didn't think I deserved it. But you walked into my life and made me feel human again, made me want things I'd convinced myself were impossible. I love you too, Imani whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. I fought it, told myself it was foolish, that it couldn't work. But I fell anyway, completely, irrevocably. He kissed her then, not with the desperate urgency of the warehouse, but with reverence, with tenderness, with a promise of forever. His hands tangled in her hair, gentle but possessive, claiming her as his. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pouring every emotion into that kiss: love, trust, commitment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. Stay, he said simply, not as an employee, not as an asset, as mine, as my partner, as the woman I want to build a future with. Yes, she breathed. Yes to all of it. He held her through the night, neither of them sleeping, just existing in the safety of each other's arms. They talked for hours, about their pasts, their fears, their hopes. He told her about his sister, about the guilt he carried. She told him about her adoptive parents, about feeling invisible her whole life. They shared pieces of themselves they'd kept hidden, building intimacy that went deeper than physical desire. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Min Jun made a phone call. Within an hour, his entire organization knew Imani Thompson was under his protection. She was his. Anyone who touched her answered to him. The message was clear and absolute. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Ji-yeon was found trying to flee to South Korea and arrested on conspiracy charges. The evidence Imani had discovered, combined with additional documents Marcus had unearthed, was damning. Federal prosecutors built a case that would put her away for decades. Tai Sung's organization collapsed. Without their leader, who disappeared after the warehouse confrontation, his fate known only to Min Jun's inner circle, Cheongryong fractured into warring factions that destroyed each other. The threat that had haunted Min Jun for 3 years simply ceased to exist. And Imani settled into her new life. She moved into Min Jun's private quarters officially, took on a real role in his legitimate businesses, using her financial skills to expand their holdings, became a mother figure to Hana, who began speaking again, her first words in months a whispered, "I love you." Imani, that made everyone in the room cry. She learned to navigate Min Jun's world, dangerous but hers, learned when to be the professional executive and when to be the fierce protector. Learned that love could exist even in darkness, that family could be chosen, that belonging didn't require fitting into someone else's definition of acceptable. And Min Jun, the cold, controlled mob boss who'd felt nothing for years, transformed. He smiled more, laughed with Hana, came home early to have dinner with his family, let himself be vulnerable with the woman who'd shown him that strength and love weren't mutually exclusive. And there it is. Justice served, love earned. If this story touched your heart, if you smiled when Imani finally had her moment, I need your support. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, that dignity has no price, that true love exists, that everyone deserves to be seen. Leave a comment with your favorite moment. Was it when Imani revealed she spoke Korean? When Min Jun kissed her in the warehouse? Or that first night when she sang to Hana? I read every comment. These stories exist because of you. Your click, your comment, your share, each one matters. Each one brings more stories of invisible people who refuse to disappear. Now, let me show you what happened 6 months later. 6 months later, the mansion's Zen garden had been transformed. White flowers everywhere, traditional Korean lanterns glowing in the early evening light. 2 families merged into one, celebrating under cherry blossom branches that Min Jun had imported specifically for this day. Imani stood in a custom-made hanbok, traditional Korean wedding attire in cream and gold, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo adorned with fresh flowers. She looked like a queen, like she belonged exactly where she stood. Min-jun waited at the altar in traditional Korean formal wear, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him. Hana walked beside her, carrying the rings, speaking animatedly in Korean about how beautiful Imani looked. The child had transformed, smiling, talking, thriving under the love of her new family. The ceremony blended Korean tradition with modern touches. They bowed to each other, to their families, to their future. When Min-jun lifted her veil and kissed her, sealing their union, the gathered crowd erupted in applause. But Imani barely heard it. All she could see was the man before her, dangerous, powerful, utterly devoted, looking at her like she'd hung the stars. "My wife," he murmured against her lips, testing out the word. "My husband," she replied, joy flooding through her. The reception was a blur of celebration. The Korean community that had once whispered about the black woman in Min-jun's household now celebrated her as Kang Buin, Lady Kang. She'd earned their respect through intelligence, grace, and fierce protection of the family. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, valued, loved. As the evening wound down, Imani found Min-jun watching her from across the garden. She excused herself from a conversation with some of the older Korean women who'd adopted her as one of their own and crossed to him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That a year ago I was alone," he said, pulling her into his arms, "convinced I'd spend my life that way. And then a maid who wasn't just a maid found photographs that changed everything, found a way into a heart I thought was dead." "Best accident of my life," Imani said, laughing. "No accident," Min-jun corrected. "Fate, destiny, you were always meant to be mine, Imani. I just had to be patient enough for you to arrive." 3 years later, the garden had changed again. A swing set stood near the koi pond, toys scattered across the perfectly manicured lawn. And Imani, 8 months pregnant, sat on a bench watching her family. Hana, now 9, was teaching Min-jun and their son, 2-year-old James, named after Imani's adoptive father, a traditional Korean game. The little boy giggled as his father pretended to lose, his laughter echoing through the garden. Hana had grown into a confident, happy child who called Imani Ayoma, and meant it with her whole heart. Min-jun looked up, caught Imani watching, and smiled. That smile, rare and precious, still made her heart skip. He said something to the children and crossed to her, crouching beside the bench, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "How are my girls?" he asked. They'd found out 2 weeks ago they were having a daughter. "Impatient to meet you," Imani said, covering his hand with hers. "She kicks every time she hears your voice. Smart girl, already knows who's boss." He kissed her belly, then her lips. "I love you, Kang Imani." "I love you too, Kang Min-jun." He helped her stand, and they walked together toward their children, toward their home, toward the life they'd built from tragedy and danger and impossible love. The maid who'd been invisible now commanded respect throughout the Korean-American community. The mob boss who'd felt nothing now felt everything, deeply and completely. They'd both been broken, both been alone, both been invisible in different ways. But they'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found themselves, found family, found home, found a love that defied logic and circumstance and every reason it shouldn't work. And as the sun set over their garden, their children playing, their future bright, Imani thought about that day with the broken vase and the scattered photographs, the day her life had changed forever. She wouldn't change a single moment. Not the danger, not the fear, not the impossible circumstances, because all of it had led her here, to this man, this family, this life, to belonging, to love, to being seen. And that was worth everything.